Welcome to the Boulder Criminal Lawyer Podcast. I'm your host, Elena Nicole, and today I'm here with Ian McDavid. Ian is a Boulder-based criminal defense attorney who has represented thousands of clients and taken over 40 cases to jury trial. And in this episode, we'll be breaking down the real-world legal side of DUI, from what actually happens during a traffic stop to how these cases are built, challenged, and decided on in court. So Ian, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Let's dive right in.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Elena.
Yes, of course. So let's start with what actually happens when someone gets pulled over for a DUI. So walk us through, step by step, what legally happens from the officer's first approach to the moment someone is placed in handcuffs.
Yeah, that's a great question. So for a DUI traffic stop, when an officer is going to pull somebody over and initiate that stop, once they start that process, as soon as they walk up to the car, and even frankly beforehand, they're looking for clues of impairment. So they're looking for, evidence of bad driving, obviously evidence of a crash, obviously. But then once somebody walks up to the car, law enforcement, and this is true for pretty much every traffic stop, they're going to be looking for those signs we call them indicia of impairment. So they're looking for the driver with the slurred speech, an odor of an unknown alcoholic beverage, as they say, the red, bloodshot, watery, glassy eyes, all those kinds of classic signs and symptoms that a person is impaired, either from alcohol or from something else. And they're looking at those signs, and then from there, they're starting to make some sort of determinations about how a person is thinking, right? So they're asking you to do these complex things, like getting your license, your registration, your insurance all out of the glove box. And that's a process that obviously it's designed to make sure you get your car in order, but it's also there to make sure you can do a complex thing, like get those 3 pieces of paper. And a lot of people can't when they're intoxicated. So they'll end up, handing over a credit card or something like that. But at that point, once that officer has enough information to know, they're going to go forward with their DUI investigation, then they're going to ask the driver if they want to go ahead and do some voluntary roadside maneuvers. Mm-hmm. That's like the big part that everyone kind of knows about when they drive down the road and they see somebody else getting a DUI where you're, standing on the side of the road, walking in that straight line. That's what we call the roadsides. From there, once the roadsides are done, if the person passes, or more properly, when the person fails, because most people fail the roadsides regardless of whether they're drunk or sober, at that point, law enforcement is going to go ahead and give that person the choice between whether taking a breath test or a blood test. And Colorado law gives drivers, under most circumstances, that choice between the tests. And then from there, they go ahead and do that test. And that's sort of the end of the investigation, depending on what they do.
Yeah, okay, so you mentioned in the beginning the officer is looking for signs of impairment. In your experience, prior to being pulled over, what are the most common signs that an officer will see that will pull someone over for?
You mean like when they're still driving?
Yeah.
Yeah, so obvious ones being swerving, crashing, those issues controlling the vehicle. But then less obvious ones are people don't turn their headlights on because they forget to do it when they're drunk, or their car's got the daytime running lights, so they actually just never turn them on. But so when you go around at dusk and you see those people driving without their lights on, whether they're drunk or sober, that is something that law enforcement is trained to look for as a clue of impairment, because they're going to say, sign of impaired judgment, not turning your lights on, even though a lot of people do it for a lot of reasons.
Right. That's something I thought of as you were saying that. Many times people are either distracted or nervous, when they get pulled over. So it could cause them to do, some funny things maybe they wouldn't normally do. So I was going to ask, in your experience, how often do you see, confusion around, like you mentioned, reaching the glove box, grabbing something random versus your registration, when someone truly isn't impaired, they're just really nervous?
Honestly, I would say the times that people are grabbing their credit card is usually a pretty good sign that they're impaired. But outside of that, right, when it's that stressful fight or freeze event that, everybody has when you get pulled over, absolutely nobody likes to be pulled over. That's really common. And so you'll get people who are argumentative, they're frustrated, they're confused, they're unsure why all of a sudden somebody's insisting that they get out of their car and do things. So those types of reactions are very common.
That makes a lot of sense. So at what point, talk to us a little bit about someone's right to remain silent. At what point during the stop does someone have that right? And does invoking that right help them or hurt them?
Well, you always have the right to remain silent. That's one of our constitutional rights. And what that means is that when law enforcement is asking you questions, you have the right to not answer those questions if the answers could potentially be incriminating. In the context of a DUI, it gets pretty muddy, though, because when anybody drives in the state of Colorado, our law says that they have already consented to a test of their blood or their breath to see whether they're impaired. In other words, you've already agreed if a cop thinks you're drunk or high or whatever, they get to test your breath or your blood. Now, what they do is if you choose not to take that test or you refuse, which is what we call it, the Department of Motor Vehicles is actually going to go ahead and administratively revoke your license. So the right to remain silent, it generally helps people when they exercise that right. You know, people who speak to the police, they're going to likely do themselves more harm than good. And that's because you don't know what law enforcement is looking for when they start asking you questions. So generally speaking, the wise idea is to invoke your right to remain silent and use it. Now, the caveat with that is in a DUI case, you don't really have the right to remain silent about the chemical test. They will make you answer that question. And if you don't answer, which you certainly don't have to answer, they're just going to call that a refusal and take your license from you. So it's not really something that comes up in the big questions in a DUI case in terms of whether you're going to lose your license or not. But it is certainly something that, you know, don't tattle on yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's kind of the key point is anything that could incriminate you further, if you're not sure what to say, or again, you know, back to the nervous piece, use your right to remain silent plays in there. And how about when an officer asks you to step out of your car? So can an officer legally ask you to step out of the vehicle without cause? And what happens if you refuse that?
Yeah, absolutely. An officer gets to ask you to step out of the vehicle. I mean, there's some legal nuance to it, but that's something for lawyers to figure out later. The practical reality is if law enforcement asks you to get out of the car, you're going to need to get out of the car, whether they're right or they're wrong for demanding it, because even if they're wrong for demanding it, they can still hit you for resisting arrest or obstructing justice, which is yet again a reason to arrest you to have you get out of the car. So there's really no reason to not be cooperative with them.
Yeah, that makes sense. What is a probable cause for a DUI arrest?
So probable cause for a DUI arrest is going to be vague, and it's going to depend on what the case is for each person, right? Probable cause can be as little as, you know, say an odor of alcohol coupled with some bad driving. That can be all that law enforcement really needs to trigger that administrative procedure and the express consent thing. Typically, you see a lot more, and the DUI investigations are really created to generate as much evidence as possible for law enforcement, which is why you really have to be careful when you are going through this process yourself.
Yeah. And when you say be careful, what are the key points that people don't realize where they should be a little bit more careful? Like, what do you see where you kind of think, why'd you do that?
Well, let's start with the obvious one, which is it is way cheaper to get an Uber than it is to pay me, right? So don't put yourself in that position in the first place where you are getting yourself a DUI. But if you're in that position where you've been driving and there's some substances in your system, I think there's a few things to do. And the first is to be cooperative, right? If you're in that position, being argumentative, being combative, being disrespectful, being rude is not going to help you ever. Guess what? That's evidence of impairment, right? Most people don't act like that normally. Don't act differently because you're being arrested. Even if you think it's unfair, even if it is unfair, right? Remember that right to remain silent. Use it.
Yeah, be cooperative. That's a great overall concept I think we all can understand and put into practice. So how about police searching your car? Can they do that during a DUI stop? Is there anything someone should be aware of when they ask to do that? How does that work?
You should never consent to a search. If you have the ability to say no, you should always say no to that search. Now, just because you say no to a search doesn't mean they're not going to do it anyway. And one of those exceptions to the search rule comes with vehicles, where law enforcement generally is given pretty wide latitude to search inside of a vehicle, so long as they have some reason to explain why they think something might be within reach of the driver that they want to track down. So don't have your car smell like alcohol. Don't have your car smell like marijuana. Don't have things visible in plain view, because all of those things are exactly what law enforcement's looking at to then justify further searching and finding more stuff. So you really don't want to consent to any of that. They can do it, but don't give them that justification on your own.
Got it. Thanks, Ian. Again, this was a great conversation. Thanks to everyone listening, and we'll see you next time.
Likewise.